guys are ready, we're starting some warm-up. So the first few tips should be pretty easy just to get you set up, and then we'll get into the real deal. So the first one is basically whenever you're creating a workbook, all you need is to, for example, color a group of sheets, or like a group of dashboards are in there according to the topic and all that. So that's the first tip, to give you sort of organization within your workbook. The second one is very useful, especially when you start creating something pretty big. Let's say if you have the categories just here, instead of bringing the other one, you can just click Command if you're on a Mac, or Control if you're on a Windows, and copy it and paste it here. So you don't have to go to get back on the left-hand side to bring your fill to the rows, all the columns. The auto aggregation as well. So when you have, for example, customer name, which is a long list of customers, and you want to do like a count of it, you can just bring this one right here while clicking on the option, for example, and you can just, or like while dragging it with a right click when you're on Windows, and you can just get the count directly, or any type of aggregation automatically before displaying the whole list, which sometimes is useless. Okay, these three were pretty fast, just to get you started. Now, when you have a map like this one by state, and I want to look at the breakdown, for example, by city, I'll give that level of detail in a tooltip. So what I'm going to do, let me just duplicate this one, and we're going to create this one. We're going to create, for example, a profit by city. So it's going to be like a simple list. There we go. We can bring the profit to the colors. Okay, cool. Now, if I go to the tooltips, instead of putting only text, I can insert actually sheet. And another advice that I'm not good at, rename your sheets. Because here, I'm just going to have a hard time finding it, and I think it's and now, while scrolling over every state, I can see the cities of that state with each profit broken down to that level of detail. Right. This one is a little bit, we're leveling up the difficulty here. So, you know, the calendar kind of like visual, we'll try to replicate it here. So here it's good, we're looking at, let's say, the profit over the months, but it's good to look at it as like a calendar, squared calendar kind of format. So let me just bring this one to the colors for now. And you know, the calendar has the week numbers and the weekdays. In here, just to have it a bit more visually understandable. Okay. So here, for example, very quickly you can say, okay, on the Wednesday for week 16, which is basically the third week of April, the profit was very bad. So you can see the trend over time at the lowest, at a lower level of detail, also having a visual that is more appealing. You can always add further details to the labels, you know, and you change the base of it. So feel free to play around with it. All I wanted to show is this like kind of like square visual. All right, the Unicode characters. So sometimes you want to bring some very specific characters, whether they're specific to your company or else. You can bring it literally from any website. I just had this one here, where you can, for example, just copy this one, and if I bring just like a text, I personally usually like to use this in like text descriptions and like this. So you can literally bring any icon and small image to your text just to bring a little sparkle to your dashboard. All right, 7th tip. Good. So here basically is the line type. So pretty easy, instead of looking at like a plain line chart, you can have a dashed one or something like a dotted line according to what you're looking for in terms of design. But you can also have a look at it in a stepped kind of line chart or in a jump kind of like Gantt chart style. So it's very easy to access, straightforward. Rotating the axis labels. So you see here like the month names, so you can guess them because we know what are the months, but if these are values that you don't know, we'll end up doing this. So what we do here, we're just gonna format it and play around with the alignment, and we can just have like horizontal text, more straightforward for any end user usually. Okay, playing a bit with an area chart kind of visual. So here you see they're both, it's literally the same chart. We're looking at the profit by month, and the idea here is that I want to highlight what's positive and what's negative. I could go for complex calculation and keep the positive profit and keep the negative profit. That's not really what I want to do. So here, I'll edit the axis. And for example, for this one, I'm going to keep only, say, the negatives. And for this one, I'm going to keep only the positives. And now, I can play around with the colors to create that kind of split where I say, okay, what's negative is red, what's positive is blue, for example. So no calculation, just like playing around with the axis. Okay, area chart again. Here really is just to bring some more design, some more fun to it. Sometimes further analytics to the sheet. So I'll just copy this profit just here and create them as a dual axis. And this second one actually, I'll just create it as a line chart. I could bring this one to the colors, and I could, bring some more colors. I could bring some thickness as well if I want to put the profit to the sides here, and whenever it goes up, it's thicker and let's say nicer color, and whenever it goes down, it's like thinner and not so nice color. Description. So you can either put the description on the title, but most of the time the title you want it to be a title, not necessarily a description. So at this stage you can only, or like simply let's say, open what we call the captions, and you can simply put your description right here. And for any user, for example, for anyone who's going to work on your workbook, again, they will find a description on how to use it, what kind of calculations did you bring, and everything without you being there all the time. Okay, here we get some news. Assign to chart. It used to be a bit difficult to create it with Tableau, but now you have what we call the viz extensions. So with this viz extension, you see the marks card has changed a little bit. So I can bring, for example, the segment to the level. It's going to show up on the right-hand side. And then we can link the segment to the, for example, category of products that we're selling. And we want to look at this by profit. Okay, literally 3-4 drag and drops, you have your second chart. You can always play with the details, with the tooltips whenever you're hovering over a certain value. Last tip for this first section, and I think it's the most interesting, it's the most useful especially, is that when I select a specific region, for example, I want the rest of the workbook to react. So what I will do, I will just simply click on this small funnel. So realistically speaking, it needs to have a logic. For now, I'm just clicking on all the sheets. So I can focus, for example, on the Western region and focus mainly on California, for example, and see everything how it moves. Just an additional element here, you can work on how fast you want to see this animation going. So maybe you want to see it slowly. see everything moving around. So it has a nice effect when it's big dashboard, you know, and you're still like telling the story of your dashboard. Okay, hands-on. Now I'll need you to be on your laptops now. Okay, so you should have access to this workbook as well. So it's the hands-on TC25 hands-on activities. So here I'll give you a moment to create a thank you chart. So you see here we're analyzing the profit by region and year. So we want to compare that, like which year for which region did most profit or least profit. But I want to see this as a thank you chart. So I'll give you, say, 2-3 minutes, and we'll get back here all together. There are like 2-3 room assistants. Grant and myself will be also in the room. Actually, the viz is not like a simple viz, right? It's not the basic one. It's not a bar chart. It's not a pie chart or a table. So actually here, the topic really is to introduce you to the extensions. So I guess you already know Tableau Exchange for all the workbooks, like all the different use cases that you have. Here the extensions are basically all further or like a bit more complex visualization, focusing on the thank you chart for today. And whenever you add one, actually, it just adds up here. We can clear up all this, and just like earlier, we can grab segment to level and date to level as well. And you can add actually, like, you know, according to the use case that you have. But really the idea here is to be able to bring any visualization from the Viz extension and not being kind of like stuck with the classic visualizations. All right. How did that go for you, Paul? Good? Easy? Perfect. Grant, I'll count with you to give them something a little bit more difficult. Not too easy.
Cool. So, next set of tips. I saw some of you getting a little bit carried away trying some of the other exercises in there as well. So if you are sort of get through the hands-on exercises pretty quick, feel free to try and follow along with some of the things we're doing in the tips workbook here as well. So first one, this is actually just one that hopefully makes your life a little bit easier, and that is a lot of people don't realise that you can actually just drag and drop files when you want to connect to data within Tableau. So often when you'll sort of connect to a new data source, you hit the plus icon, you can then obviously link whether it's to a database or a static file. If it's a static file, you know, save the time of going through your file directory, just open up the folders, drag it in, and that will add it as a new data source. Now, the sort of slight change on that, which is a bit more helpful, that people don't often realise, is that if you find a list or a table of data on the internet and you think, you know what, I want to throw this into Tableau and do a bit of analysis, a lot of the time people don't realise that I could actually take this table and purely just go down, copy all of that data. This is winners of the Ballon d'Or. If any of you are, I want to say football fans, I'll make myself say soccer fans. But if you copy that, control paste that, that will actually then add a new data source. You'll see in the top left, and I realise for some of you sat a little bit further back, it's a little bit small. Up here it just says clipboard, so it's just taken that from my clipboard and actually given me all of that data. It's not quite recognised that the year, for example, is actually a dimension. I could convert that over to the screen, bring that in, and I've now got a list of my Ballon d'Or winners that I can then go and do my own analysis within Tableau. So just hopefully one that's just helpful. People don't always realise. Taking that a little bit further, what you might find sometimes though, if you're copying and pasting data from the web, it doesn't quite come through how you'd like it to. So this is the same data set, slightly different website that I pulled it from. It has the player name and then the country they're from within brackets. Now you might think, oh, okay, I can go and create a calculated field and try and pull out the country out of that, and you absolutely can. But Tableau generally likes to try and make things a little bit easier for you, so if I right-click on the winner, actually go to transform, I can just use split. So I don't need to go into like custom split or anything like that. It's actually normally pretty good at looking at what's in the field, and actually automatically it has now pulled out the player name and then the country that they're from. And if I did want to, let's say, look at how many wins there were by each country, I can now go ahead and do that analysis. Okay, next one. This is a nice visualization that I found on Tableau Public, actually, that someone put together. So if you're planning what you want to do after the conference, maybe, go and take a look at this on Tableau Public. I think the name is down here. So it's Lisa Trescott who put this together. The reason I showed this, well, first it's a nice dashboard, but also what if I wanted to take this dashboard and put it into another workbook? Maybe there were certain parts of it that I wanted to pull and just take as they are. A lot of people don't realise you can actually just copy not only individual worksheets, but whole dashboards. And you can do that across different workbooks as well. So if you copy a dashboard, open up a new workbook and paste it in, it will paste the sheets, it will paste the dashboard, it will paste the connections to the data as well. So just a really helpful tip if you want to sort of bring things into, combine things maybe, or maybe even separate things into different workbooks. Okay, next up, tip number 17, which is going to be assigning subsets of colours. So this is one that is, I guess, more just sort of realising the way that the sort of Tableau interface works a little bit. So using that tip that Selma showed you earlier, I'm going to hold command, duplicate that month pill and drop it onto colour. And that's helpful. It's given me my colour across the different months. But maybe I want my quarter ends, for example, to be in a really bright colour, because it really sort of makes them pop and stand out on the page. What I could do, or use something that's a little bit different, let's do this from here. If I control, if you're on Windows, or command select each of the end of quarters, and then hit assign palette, it will just assign it to those that I have selected. I've not picked the best one there, so there's a few more blues in there, but it gives you the idea, right? We can apply that subset of colour to certain categorical fields within the data set. Okay, so this one is going to be a little bit more advanced. We're going to use, I guess, combine a couple of the things that Selma has showed you to build a new chart type, essentially. The first thing that I'm going to do here is I've got essentially a duplicate version of profit here. What I want to build, as you can see there, is a lollipop chart. That is due to the way that it looks. If you haven't seen one before, they literally look like lollipops. So in order to do that, I'm first off just going to do a dual axis. Whenever we do a dual axis, it essentially puts profit on the left and the right in this case. Normally, it's good practice to synchronise the axis, unless you're working with maybe one thing's a percentage and one's an absolute value. And the sort of good thing about the way that I've done this, the reason I can then build the lollipop chart, is that you'll notice on the left-hand side, I now have two different marks cards for each version of the profit that I had in the view. Which at the moment is kind of a little bit pointless, because they're both set as circles, right? It's just two circles sat on top of each other. But the nice thing about having two different marks cards is I can control them separately. So the first marks card, I'm going to change to a bar. I'm going to bring the size right down, and maybe for that one I want the colour in a grey. Then for my second version of the profit, we've got the circle. I'm actually going to take my profit onto colour, and this time bring the size right up. I can maybe even sort of change the label, align that in the centre, and now we've got that lollipop chart, right? So essentially, and what you'll find actually when you start to get more advanced with Tableau is things like dual axis and the ability to have multiple marks cards allows you to get a lot more flexible in terms of the visualizations that you put together. Okay, super quick, simple one this time, maybe one just to reduce your frustration at times, let's say. Sometimes when you're putting marks on things within Tableau, it can be a little bit frustrating and maybe don't appear quite where you want. You want to have a bit more control over it. What a lot of people don't realise is if you just go and find a particular mark that you want to label, if you right-click it, go to Mark Label, and Always Show, it will always show the mark for that point. So you don't even need to go to the label on the marks card. You literally just, we'll do another one while we're at it. Pick one that we're interested in, Always Show, and you can see in there, it now just shows the mark for that particular one. And this is useful if the data changes as well, that mark is going to update and continue to show. Awesome. So this is another, I guess, sort of best practice kind of tip, really. This is really about some of the metadata that we add to the data sources when we're connecting to the data. In this case, the example that I'm going to use is like the start of the fiscal year. So maybe for us, our fiscal year runs from April, and I want that to be reflected throughout the whole data set. If I have a look for my order date, right-click and head to my default properties, you can see one of the options in there is the fiscal year start. Worth bearing in mind, obviously I'm doing this on a date field. If you were doing this on a metric within your data, let's say your discount, for example, you might want to go in there and set the default aggregation to be average, because you normally always average a discount. You probably also want the default number format to be a percentage, because it's your discount, right? So there are more things that you can do with this, but the fiscal year, any of these kind of default properties, really useful to sort of bear in mind. What it's going to do there is swap it over, and you can see I've now got FY 21, 22, and so on. Cool. Label inside the bar. So this is one of our sort of formatting tips that we've got today. A couple of different ways that we can do this. First one, really simple. Second one, a little bit more advanced, actually goes back to using that dual axis tip that we just looked at. So the really simple one, I'm just going to command drag my sales onto the label and then align it on the left-hand side. That's it, that's simple, right? Puts it into the bar. In this case, though, it's going to put it completely on the left-hand side, just because it looks at the bar, I said align left, it goes right, I'll put it right as far over to the left-hand side as I can. What some people might like is they think, oh, well, wouldn't it be great if I could kind of have it at the end of the bar, but inside the bar? It would be great. It's not going to do that for you automatically. So that is where, and this is where the more you use Tableau, the more you kind of get to grips with the way that it handles things. You can get quite creative in terms of how you sort of build out your visualization. So in my case, I'm going to do a dual axis again. I'll go through this a bit quicker because it's the same steps as last time. Two versions of sales, synchronize the axis. I can actually get rid of the header on that top one. Okay. We're back where we started, but we now have, again, two versions of marks card. One I'm just going to leave as my bar. The second one, I'm actually going to change the mark type to be a Gantt bar. Put the label back in. And this time, if you haven't used the Gantt bar, sort of when you first bring it in, and I realise that will be quite difficult to see, but it is actually just showing, there you can see it there. It's just a tiny little mark at the end, because I haven't told it how big to make the Gantt bar, so by default it just comes in as a tiny little line. And hopefully you can guess what I'm going to do here, is if I now put a mark, I will change it to white so it's a bit clearer to see, and align it to the left of the Gantt bar. It now does what I was hoping for. It puts it kind of at the end of the bar, but in Tableau's eyes it's to the left of the Gantt bar. So hopefully quite a nice one in terms of the formatting, like I say, getting to grips with the way that sort of Tableau handles things. Super quick one, if you are using things like average lines, reference lines, normally, for those of you that are newer to Tableau, you pull those in from the analytics pane. So typically we spend a lot of time in the data pane, come over to the analytics pane, you can do that. To remove them, you can pick them up and drag them off, but sometimes you don't want to have to drag. So if you click them and hit backspace, it will just remove them off the chart. Two colours on colour. This is actually quite a handy one. I think one that a lot of people, maybe if you've gone and Googled it, looked at forums, you'll have spotted this one. But not always obvious, I would say, is if you want to have category and segment on colour, it can sometimes be difficult to try and achieve that. At the moment, I've got category on colour, but my segment is on detail. What that means is if I hover over, you can see it's breaking it down by segment, but they're all under the same colour category at the moment. What a lot of people don't realise is that these small icons here are actually interactive. If I click on segment and change it to colour, I've now got two colours on colour. And it kind of does this gradual shading within the categories now for the different segments. Nice. Good. So we're starting to get to, I think, hopefully, for those of you that are sort of used Tableau a little bit before, where the next couple of things we'll look at start to get quite helpful in terms of saving your time and also sharing Tableau workbooks with other people. So this one is going to, I'll be honest, look a little bit odd at first. You're going to be like, Brian, why are you telling me about this? It looks rubbish. But I'll then show you how it can look quite nice. And the tip here is a thin line of colour in your dashboards, typically. So if I actually come down to my objects in the bottom left-hand corner and bring in a blank. Small additional tip there, which I guess was unintentional. If you drag something out and it's as a floating object and you want it to be tiled, hold down the Shift button and it will automatically change it for you. So you don't have to go back and change the selection down here. If I then come to the layout section and apply this, let's say, as a blue, as a blue, and then just change the padding to be zeros and drag it as small as I can, I get like a small, almost like divider, you can think about it within your dashboard. Like I say, at the moment, I don't love how this looks. But if you start to combine this with things like containers, where you can get really specific about how big your objects are, you can start to put together dashboards that do then look really quite sort of tailored and neat. So what you'll see in the top left-hand corner there, obviously I've got my dashboard title, and then I have what looks like a little divider before I have the description of the dashboard. That is done by using that exact tip that we just used. So in here is a really small 2-pixel tool, white blank, that I've put in there as a way to just break it up and start to get that really sort of nice design element to your dashboards. The actual tip that I wanted to show you here is swap sheets. You're going to use this one in the exercise, so pay attention. This is a really handy one, especially if you're building things like template dashboards that you then want to share with other people in your business. The reason it's so helpful is you might notice a couple of other things I've done here. So I've formatted the left-hand side. I've also got things like padding around the sheets. So I've got a grey background, but then the sheets are white. I've applied a border to the sheets as well. Just to start to give you, if you go on Tableau Public, you'll see people do a lot of this kind of stuff. It just helps give the dashboard a bit of room to breathe, and people are then able to focus on the individual objects within the dashboard. The reason the swap sheets functionality is really helpful is that it maintains all the padding. It maintains the background colours you've applied, it maintains the border you've applied. So all of that work that I've done in this layout section here, if I now swap in, let's say that, let's put something, let's go to that lollipop chart that we built, and very small. Unfortunately, I can't zoom in on this because I know it will then, it won't show it when I zoom in. But there is a very small arrow, so a curved arrow there, double-ended arrow. If you hit that, it will then, we can delete the placeholder, we can delete it. It will then drop in that lollipop chart, but as I say, it's got all the padding, it's got the border, it maintains all of that. So personally, I know it seems really small, that is a massive time saver if you want to give people templates in your organisation and you want them to kind of stick to them as much as possible. Final tip for this section, this is what you're going to do in the hands-on, this is definitely sort of heading more into the sort of intermediate advanced area, is a chart selector. There's a few different ways that you can do this. In the past, you often would do this with like containers and things would sort of expand and collapse. We now have a capability called dynamic zone visibility. So that's actually what I'm going to use here. I want to say it was released about sort of a year and a half ago. And what I want to be able to do is from my parameter, this is just a parameter with two options, donut and bar, I want to be able to show the bar chart when it's selected as bar and show the donut chart when it's selected as donut. For those of you that have sort of played around with the container option in the past, one thing that's quite annoying is you can't do it for multiple objects. I'm going to actually select a container here. I'm going to go to my layout, and it's this option here, control visibility using value. That's what we're going to make use of here. So I'm going to check that, and within my data set, I've got a calculated field that says bar chart only. All that calculated field is, it says, and I can very quickly look at it, it just says, does the parameter equal bar? It's as simple as that. We've got one for the bar chart, one for the donut chart, each of them just say, you see it there, zooming it the wrong way, donut or bar equals bar. There's another version that says donut or bar equals donut. So basically you just need a Boolean value, you need a true-false value, and at the moment it equals bar, so we still see it. When I change this over to donut, it's going to disappear. I'm going to do the same thing on this one, and do it for our donut chart only, and now we have that dynamic chart selector. So in terms of building flexibility into your dashboards, allowing users to choose what kind of visual they want, saving you space so that your dashboards don't look too sort of cluttered and overpowered, this is a really, really helpful tip. And that takes us into hands-on exercise number 2. So we'll do another sort of 5 minutes or so on this one. You're going to be building out that example we just looked at, but I think we've got a stacked bar and a pie chart in order to do it. We'll walk around the room again. Any questions? Put your hand up and we'll help out.
It was just like I should have minimized this and opened the phone.
Okay, so the fix for that is in the top left corner, up here, the thing looks like a monitor, and say full screen, and then click it again. She has questions.
Okay.
So just a quick note, few of you have this question from this issue with the size of the VM. So on the top left you have a small icon looking like a monitor. If you click there and click reconnect, it will just basically reset the size and you will have it on a full screen.
Cool. We will run through that second one on screen now. I realised that was a bit more of a challenge than the first one, so I think people are still working through that one. I'll go through it a little bit quickly just to make sure we can get through all 50 tips, but hopefully this will give you an idea of maybe where you were sort of struggling with it if you haven't quite finished it yet. First step is we need a parameter. So we're going to call ours stacked bar or pie. We have to change this to a string because we know that we want to put in text as the options. Change it to a list. 2 options, either stats bar or pie chart. Whether you sort of capitalise these things at this point is not actually too important. What is important is that whatever sort of text you use here, you then match it within your calculated field. That's like one thing that is really key. And whether it's a capital letter does matter. So we created our parameter. I'll show you that parameter at the moment. It doesn't do anything, right? I haven't linked it to anything. So the next step is our 2 calculated fields. First one is stats bar only. Another useful tip, hopefully, for some of you, if you've not seen it before, you can actually drag things into the calculation window. So rather than typing my parameter name, I can drag it in. And I want to have one, in this case, where it says stats bar. And a second one. Which is pie chart. So that's now, to be honest, in a way, that's the hard work. We've now got a parameter that links into my 2 calculated fields that are true or false, and kind of by their nature, when one of them is true, the other one's false, and that other one is true, the original one is false. So we come to our dashboard. We're using that swap sheet tip that I mentioned. One thing that a couple of people I think got caught on is you need to select the thing that you want to swap out before you'll see that option. So select my stats bar area here, swap it in. In our case, we can delete the placeholder. Swap it in, delete the placeholder. We now select the sheet of interest. Let's start with the stats bar. Go to layout, control using value. And you want to find, and you'll have the same as me, we do now have quite a few parameters, but you want to find the stats bar only. If you want to then show your parameter, we can do this from either of the sheets, but just hit the little drop down when you've got the grey outline selected. Go to parameter, and it is our stats bar or pi. And what we should see, so we've done half the work, it's disappearing when it should disappear. Let's do the final step for the pie chart. Select the pie chart only for that one, and we've now got that appearing and disappearing visualizations. Perfect. If you haven't quite finished that, don't worry sort of too much. Like I say, you will get access to the completed workbook, so you can always review it after. And yeah, we'll hand back over to Selma for the 3rd section of it.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So, we're at the middle of the session. We went through half of the tips, and now we're going to go through the third series. All right. So here we're going to talk about map layers. So you know when you have maps of a city and you want to add on top of it like the gas stations, and on top of it like, I don't know, supermarkets, and on top of it different like retail stores and all that. These are all map layers. So here we'll be playing with like states, on top of it cities. So let me just get rid of this one for now. And we can bring states just here. Put them as a thin map. And actually on the top of this one, we're gonna put cities. I don't want them to be on the same map. And just here, like when dragging and dropping actually another geographical element, you would have this add marks layer. And now the points, or again, like the different marks cards, will show me 2 points. I can add them to like as a red. I can even play around with the shapes and put them as like a square instead of a circle. So that allows you really to lay out different elements. Sorting values on a map. So you have different ways to do so, and we're going to go through like just one of them. So here, let's say we want to see the profit by profit by 60. Okay. So if we increase slightly the size so that we can see the difference, here we go. So you can see some of the dots are higher than the other, or like bigger than the others, and all that, meaning some of the cities have larger profit than the others. So at this stage, to sort the cities, we can just go further in the details in how do we sort these cities according to the profit. So you have the sorting according to the data source. Usually is the way it has been, the input has been done. Alphabetic way by field. So you can have the profit on the sheet, but you want to sort it by sales, for example. Not sure what would be the use case at this stage, but you got my point. So you can play around with like whether you want it ascending, descending. Differences are not huge here. But if you focus just on this area, you can see the difference. And then you can have a manual, sorting. This is usually when you have like a smaller set of values. You don't necessarily want to handle like all the cities of the US manually. So that's one way to sort your cities or like any geographical element on a map. Okay, now I want to zoom in like on a specific area. For example, if I want to, when I click on California, I don't want to see the rest of the map. I want to focus on California only. So if you notice, this one is not a sheet. We're on a dashboard at this stage. So the sheet is actually called 38 zoom on axis. Let's keep that in mind. And what we want to do is actually what we call a dashboard action. So if I go on dashboard and say create an action, I'm just going to create a filter action because we're going to filter on one state whenever we select a state, and actually whenever we deselect or whenever we like remove the values, we want to show all the values. And the selection is on state. Great. So now, when I click on California, I don't really care about the other states. I can now focus on this specific value, this specific region. And whenever I deselect, I can then have an overview. One last tip on the maps, which is the buffer points. So what does it mean? It means like, if you say, I live in this point, and I want to see, for example, the pharmacies within 1 mile of radius, how do I do that on Tableau? So let's say I have my three points. Let's say those are the pharmacies, for example. So the first thing to do is to actually create the point that's going to define this pharmacy. So there is a function called makePoint. And how to make a point is basically just like a junction of a latitude and a longitude. So this function is just going to basically tell Tableau, make the point between this latitude and this longitude. Quick, small caveat, these are latitude and longitude coming from the data source, not the automatically generated ones. Once we have the points and we brought them to the map, we can create a buffer. So using the parameters, a bit like what Grant was doing earlier, to choose between a bar chart or a pie chart, we can have the same parameter, say 1, 2, 3, 4, half radius. So just basically going through like a series of float numbers. So for the buffer, we're going to say, I want a buffer for the points that we just created, for the buffer radius, which for me is a parameter to play around with it, and the unit is miles. Could be kilometers, could be meters, could be centimeters, depending on the level of detail you're working on. All right, so now, if I bring back the buffer on the layers, there we go. So now if I want to see anything that is within half a mile of those specific points, then I can play around with it. So if we stack all these tips together, imagine you have your city with all like supermarket, gas stations, stores, and all that, and you live in that point, like your office is in that point, you can have the radius of it. So you can stack all these tips together. Okay, I think we've had enough of maps. Another chart type. So to create a funnel chart, you have two options. One is to use the Viz extensions, but that one we've seen it already. Here I'm going to show you another way to do so. So we're going to leverage everything we've learned so far. So I'm just going to duplicate using that command. I'm going to duplicate the saves, and actually this one I want it to be reversed. So I'll just go on the axis and simply click reverse, and it's going to basically multiply it by minus. So if we hide, don't show the headers, you have your funnel chart. 2 clicks and you have it. You can always play around with the colors to have this kind of like gradient color, like most of the funnel charts that we see. Feel free to do so. Here we go. Could be something like this. Okay. In terms of calculation, wanted to show you this tip. Personally, it was a discovery for me also when I was like preparing these exercises. So here we're looking, for example, at the sum of discount, which is one number after the decimal, let's say. We have different ways to round up this number according to, again, to the level of granularity you're doing and to the analysis you're doing. I'll just copy this one here, and we have this function called, it's a simple roundup, and you're going to see the difference in the values. It's going to take it to, let's say, the higher value in a sense, but keeping one value after the decimal. If I copy it again, just so that we see the differences all one next to the other, I can have what we call the floor rounding, which is the lowest part of the roundup. So instead of 60.8 becoming 61, which I think is the most logical most of the time, then it becomes 60. So you just keep the decimal of it. Then if you want to keep really like just the decimal, instead of going to floor in the same project, then we have ceiling. And there you take the highest decimal. So these are just like quick tips to basically make a float look like an integer whenever needed or to round it up. Okay. In a workbook, usually you have multiple sheets or regrouped in a dashboard. Then you can have multiple dashboards regrouped within a story, and it's there where basically your data story starts. So you can have your title, we're not going to talk about it, different chart types, we're not going to talk about them, we're going to talk about this specific section here. So for now they look like caption boxes, and I can say 1, 2, and 3. So it could be a caption that I personally am doing, or like writing down, which could be, for example, analysis of profit, and the other one could be like sales management, and the other one could be product details. Could also be something as simple as numbers, dots, or just like arrows to say which page are we on. As simple as that, so just put them or leave them. So these are just like small tips to make really like your storytelling more fluid. Custom shapes. So you see that since earlier we're talking like, talk about like circles and squares, but most of you, like especially when we're working, if you work with like certain specific category products, for example, you want them to look like that, like, I don't know, if you're working at like a car retailer, you want to have the icons in front of you. You want it to be a bit more visual. So here, instead of having the segments being simple circles, I'm just going to bring them to shapes just here. So shapes is just one of the visuals that I have here. And then I can, instead of keeping it to default, I can bring anything I want. So if you want to play with cars, well, don't judge me on the fact that I'm putting home office as in a car and consumer in a car and all that, just for the example. How do you do that? How do you bring those images to Tableau? I guess that's the real question. So there we go. So when you are on your say on your laptop, usually once you download Tableau, you have on your document you have something called my Tableau repository. This is a by default folder that we have. Part of this folder repository, like my Tableau repository, you should have something called shapes. And here actually you can create a folder of any downloaded image. So you have specific cards, you have specific product categories, specific type of pens, anything you want. Just create your folder there, get back to Tableau, reload the shapes, and you have your images there. All you need is to assign them, a bit like what you would do with colors. Okay. This one I called it the zero line because it's actually any constant line, honestly. So here, basically what we're saying, I want to have a reference, either at 0. So when I bring the constant line from the analytics pane, it would ask me, Selma, which value do you want to put in? Let's put it at 0 at this stage. But it could also be my constant for, let's say, a threshold that I want to meet, or like my target for the quarter or for a year, or anything like this. So let's say I want it to be at 50,000. And I have it there. And then you can play around with the colors and the conditions and all that. If I stay here on the analytics pane, besides the constant itself, I can bring the average by table, by pane. So I can bring the average, and this one will move around according to the values that you would have on your sheet. The median, the total, and all that. So called it a zero line, but then thought about it, it's actually any constant line according to what you want. Okay, waterfall chart. A bit like the funnel chart, you can go with a viz extension. That's an option, but I will show you how to do it without a viz extension, a bit like the old school way. So here we're looking at, for example, the region by month, or like the profit by region and month. Okay. So let me bring the profit just to the details for now. And so at this stage, let's look at it by month. So the idea here is that I'm going to put it as a count bar. Okay. This profit will go to negative, just so that we create some of the values. We can put where? And list the regions. Regions can go to color. Go. And then to actually create the actual waterfall chart, I have the profit, let's say, but I want to see like the running total of the profit. So the real tip here is that instead of keeping the average, like some of the basic aggregations, you can just go to a quick table calculation and create a running total. You can play, just for information, you can change like the context of your calculation. I'm sure there will be some other sessions about like calculations and LODs and fixed calculations. I'll leave that to that session. But the idea here is that we want this calculation to be calculated at the month level, but also take into consideration the region. So I'm just going to change it to specific dimension and to region itself. Okay. Missing one step maybe. And it's here where maybe my notes would be helpful.
Bring into the slide.
So the idea here is to bring on the slide. There we go. So basically now for each month I have my waterfall chart going by region and by month. Bit complicated, I have to say it, and it's in this kind of visualization where a viz extension becomes handy. Okay, a donut chart. Same thing, like all the other charts. So the idea is that maybe a year and a half ago, this extension, like Tableau Exchange, did not really exist. So we had to go through these things manually, like we're trying to show you now. Today, these extensions exist, but not everyone can use them, just being aware of that. So these options, or like these tips, they always come in handy. So here we're looking at, let's say, profit and sales. We're gonna focus on, let's say, profit. Let me put this one on the details for now. So donut charts start with something that doesn't look like a donut at all. So we're gonna start with two references, which is sum zero or average zero, but basically we just want to have like two circles at the same time. So we're both gonna put them as a pie chart. Here we go. And then for just one of them, let's say the angle, so how big the triangle is or not, depends on the profit. And maybe we can put the, we had segment before. We can put segment into colors. Okay, and you see, one kind of like works, one doesn't work. I'm gonna go to your axis. And here the tip is pretty simple. This one I'm gonna make it slightly bigger, the one with the colors. And if this one goes white, then you have your donut chart. Feel free to go entire view, hide the headers, and then you have your pie chart by segment for each category that you have. Few steps. Once you get the logic, you're there. Okay, enough talking. Let's head to the third hands-on exercise. So, just like earlier, have the hands-on workbook, head to the third, I think it's a sheet or a dartboard, I think it's a sheet, and I'll leave you to it with the instructions for a couple of minutes. Already. So you can just head down to state, for example, add it to the layers. State, you can get it as a field map, for example. The idea is that you could drag and drop CT above the stage just so that you have the right layovers. You have postcode as well. I know it's not necessarily on the exercise, but really to show you that you can also add another layer on the top of it. This one could become, for example, a shape, and you can go with something like a star for each postcode in purple. Not super clear. Color choice. So these are all the postcodes along with the state along with the cities. So let's say in the zoom in map, whenever you click on a state, for example, you can zoom in and have all your postcodes, all your cities for that specific state. Grant, I'll leave it up to you for this fourth section.
Perfect. Okay, so we always knew that 50 tips in 90 minutes was going to be tight on time, and it is. So this last section is going to have to be relatively quick. So I'll go through them at a bit more pace. Some of these in here, I'll be honest, we're heading more to the advanced section. So if you're sort of not 100% sure on them, don't worry, you'll get the workbooks, and you'll actually get the steps for the hands-on exercises as well, but we're just going to try and make sure we're giving you all 50 tips that you were promised. First one, nice and simple. We talked about mark labels before. Sometimes they can be a bit frustrating. They don't appear quite where you want them to. A lot of people don't realise that if you click them and then move them, you can control where that mark goes. And you can sort of specifically place it where you like. Sort of one to mention on this, if your data is changing, probably not one that you want to use really, because it's going to sort of be fixed in that place. But let's say you're presenting for a particular meeting and you want it really clearly visible, useful tip. Next one, I'm actually going to come back to because it's a bit longer, so if we've got time, we'll come back to it. Another quick, simple one is just to move your y-axis to the top. Sometimes this really frustrates people. They build a chart, and for example, I've got all of the years down at the bottom here, and they want it to show at the top of the visualization. One that's really in a bit of a hidden menu is if you hit Analysis, Table Layout, and then Advanced. So definitely hidden away. There is an option here that says Show Innermost Level at the bottom of the view where there is a vertical axis. If you uncheck that, it will move that mark up to the top. And I know that sounds simple, but I have had customers that have been getting so frustrated with that, so that ability to just move it up there, really helpful. The next one is an additional chart type. So this one is called a DNA chart, just because of the way that it looks. The way that we do this is going to be similar to the dual axis technique. But this is going to be a bit more advanced in that we're actually going to leverage measure names and measure values. So if you haven't used them before, measure names and measure values, and you will actually see them over on the left-hand side, you can see measure values down there. They're essentially ways that you can control multiple measures at the same time. So you could just bring in the measure values. The thing with that is it's going to bring in every single measure that you have in your data set. So it gets pretty messy pretty quickly. Personally, my tip as to how I like to trigger the measure names and measure values is if you've got two different metrics in the view, you drag one of them onto the axis of the other, and it will trigger measure names. And now I've got those two measure values in there. And essentially that just means I now have this single pin that allows me to control the two different measures. It's put measure names on colour, so I've now got two circles for the two different measures. To make it look like a DNA chart, we just need a little line that connects the two. That's what the DNA chart kind of looks like. To make it a little bit clearer for you, I'm just going to uncheck show 0. And now this is where we're going to combine some of the tips we've used before in terms of the dual axis with measure values. We're going to duplicate the measure values, use the dual axis, make sure they're synchronized as we've done every time. And on the second, actually I think it'll be on the first one, we will change this to a line. And that is me essentially saying I want to draw a line between one measure to the other. At the moment it doesn't quite do that, it just draws a line through all of the different positions, I think is the data that I have here. So I just need to tell Tableau, rather than having measure names on colour, put it on the path. So what that means, like I say, it's now going to draw a line from one measure to the other measure, and now we get this DNA chart. So it's drawing a line between one to the next, and we've got the two measures in each of the different colours of circles as well. This tip, the measure values, can be really helpful in lots of different visualization types. So one that is purely for formatting reasons, I quite like using it, even though it doesn't really add much, is curved bar charts. They have like a curved end to your bar charts. In this case, I'm telling Tableau to draw a line between 0 and then my sum of sales. So to get my 0, I literally have just double-clicked and typed 0. That's all I've done there. I now do the same tip, sum sales onto the 0, change it to a line, and it is trying to do that. It's trying to draw a line from 0 to the sales, but it's currently doing it across 2 different rows. So I do the same tip as we did before. I put measure names on the path, increase the size, and we've now got rounded bar charts. Super simple, but you'll see it in terms of it looks cool. You'll see it on Tableau Public quite a lot, to be honest. Single letter axis. We kind of looked at this a little bit when Selma showed you how you can sort of like rotate the axis. One thing that people often don't realise is that if you hit the format on the axis and go to the date, you can actually put in your own sort of like custom format. You can use the different sort of options that are in there. So for example, if you put 3 lowercase m's, it will do an abbreviated version of the month. If you put 4, it will do the whole month. What people often don't realise is if you put 5 in there, it just puts a single letter for that month. So if you want to save a bit of space on your axis, useful tip there. This one, I'll be honest, I did not know. It's more just like it's one of the things that's in there sort of more for like accessibility in terms of how you use Tableau. If you, and I have to apologise because I can't remember it on Windows. I think Windows is actually just Control. On a Mac, you do Command Control and then up or left and right. You can control the size of your row height or your row width as well. This is a personal favourite of mine in terms of it comes back to formatting, and as you probably guessed with a lot of my tips, I like to sort of have the formatting in the workbook looking really nice and neat, is that when you build these KPI bars, you get this really big blue band of like showing you that you selected it, and I personally don't think that looks very nice. So one way that you can actually get around this is similar to the tip that Selma showed you. So if you go to your shapes, at first it's going to apply like a circle as the shape. A bit random, it maybe looks slightly better, but still a bit, not quite what I'm looking for. One of the shapes that you can actually put in your Tableau repository is a completely transparent PNG file. So there is nothing there to a certain extent, but Tableau thinks there's an image there. So if I assign that, what that means is that now there's no visible image to us, but Tableau still allows you to click on something. And I personally, like I say, I just think this makes the KPI bar look a lot neater. Another one which is around sort of getting flexibility into your dashboards is that a really useful tip is to have a parameter that allows you to change a selected metric. So I've got a parameter, the list of 4 different metrics in here, and I have a calculated field, which is a case statement that says when it's sales, give me the sum of sales. When it's profit, give me the sum of profit, and so on. You can actually use your KPI bar, if you've done it using measure names and measure values, to change that parameter with a parameter action. We have showed you filter actions, we've showed you highlight actions, I think, earlier on as well. You can also change parameters. So we're going to go from the KPI bar on selection, target our select metric parameter, and use the measure names as the source. And what that means is when I click across here, it will dynamically change everything that's in my dashboard. Which personally, I think, again, when you talk about saving time and space on your dashboard, allowing people to answer more questions with a dashboard, this one is super helpful. We're going to skip to 49. Now this is actually the hands-on exercise number 4, and I'm wary we have got 2 minutes left, so you're going to struggle to get this done, and I don't want you guys to miss the keynote as well. So what I'll do is I'll run you through this one in a bit more detail, but we potentially won't have time for the actual hands-on section. What we're doing here is rather than using a standard legend, we have built a really simple chart that just has the 4 regions and essentially a single number for each of them. So there are 4 different regions. I'm then going to build 2 actions. The first one is a highlight action. So when I hover over this top chart, let's highlight the region. So that's already giving me as much as a normal legend would give me. The second one is that we're going to build a filter action. And exactly the same setup. This time we're going to do it on select. And we will show everything when we unselect it. And now we've got a legend that not only highlights things, it also zooms in this case because we're using a map when I make the selection. So it's just a nicer way of having legends within your dashboard. And that is, with 40 seconds to spare, 56. What I will do, you'll get access to this, which has got all of the tips broken down by the different areas. And Selma, if you want to wrap up.
For the last 20 seconds. So there was a summary of all the tips that we've seen, 50 of them, all in all. So you'll have the PDF of the slides, don't worry about that one. And on this link, so because you'll have the PDF of the slides, on this link you will also have all the workbooks, the solutions, and the exercises, everything will be there. For the last second, coffee is on us. If you fill in the survey, so please scan the QR code. And finally, thank you very much and enjoy TC.
Thank you very much.